Welcome to Lesson 7, Where Does Our Waste Go? Have you ever wondered what happens to our litter and why we're constantly told to not drop it? What impact is it having on the environment? And why is that impact on the environment just getting worse over time? Well, this topic is all about what happens to our waste and how we manage it. It's part of the Biology B7 Ecology unit. Throughout this lesson, you'll see this sign, and it would be worthwhile you taking some notes when you do. So here's the starter. Can you suggest 3 reasons why our population growth is so rapid after the 1850s by looking at the graph below? The suggest command word simply means you presenting a possible case or an argument by drawing on your own knowledge. The extension is to explain why the population went down slightly here for a short time, as shown by the red dot. I'm going to give you 1 minute starting from now. So let's see how you did. 3 possible reasons why our population growth was so rapid could be to do with the Industrial Revolution. Productivity was so much faster because machinery was being used instead of people. This meant economies were thriving and there was a massive improvement in the standard of living. Number 2, better medicines. An improvement in the healthcare system meant that people were living longer. And finally, improved farming. Modern farming methods meant that food supply was plentiful for our ever-increasing population. For the extension, you had to explain why the population went down slightly between 1347 and 1353. It's not shown on the graph, but there is a significant dip at this time. And the answer is because of the plague. The Black Death killed between 75 to 200 million at this time. How did you do? Here's the learning outcomes for this lesson. The challenge is to describe how the rise in the human population impacts our planet. And the aspire is to explain how pollution affects biodiversity. This is a snapshot of our world population on April the 13th at 3:45. It's taken from the Worldometer's website that you can see on this slide. Looking at the graph that we saw in the starter, we can easily see how the population as it stands today is getting closer to 8 billion and could keep on rising. But what challenges do we face as our population increases exponentially? So what does a growing population mean? Well, more people means there's a high demand for consumables. Because the standard of living improves, we want more products. And to make more products, we want to be able to take out raw materials from our planet. And if we do that, then the resources from our planet are going to be removed a lot faster, but not replaced. This isn't great news for our planet. So here's an exam question linked to this topic. Look at the bar chart. It shows the average amount of energy used by each person in 1 year in the USA, Japan and Bangladesh. On the y-axis you can see energy used per person in 1 year in gigajoules. And on the x-axis are the countries. Suggest one reason why so much more energy is used per person in the USA than in Bangladesh. I'm going to show you how to bug your answer. You may know this exam technique already, but it's quite a useful one for any exam question. The B stands for box. So in this case we're going to box our command word, which is suggest. The U stands for underline. Underline any key parts of this question. The G stands for go back and check your answer once you've written it. This exam question is worth 1 mark, so I'm going to give you 1 minute starting from now. And that's your 1 minute. How did you do? So you may know already that the USA is a developed country compared to Bangladesh. So your answer could be USA has more wealth or more technology, more devices and more of a need for electricity. Any one of those could get you the mark. So having more people on our planet means more resources are being used up and at a much faster rate. It's estimated that by 2060 our fossil fuels will be depleted. There'll be more waste and there'll be more pollution, of which there are 3 types: land, air and water pollution. Unless we dispose of our waste and chemical materials properly, then the levels of pollution will become dangerously high and affect all our ecosystems on this planet. So, more people means more waste and more pollution, which is harming or killing organisms. So more people means more waste. I want you to consider a scenario. Imagine you bought this pack of apples from the supermarket. Think about 2 things. Where do both the apples and packaging end up? And can you think of any pollution involved along the way? Write your ideas down. I'm going to give you 1 minute starting from now. That's my cat. Last 10 seconds. Okay. So here's some possible answers. For the fate of apples, if you're to eat an apple, most of it is going to be digested and absorbed through your digestive system. Some parts are indigestible and will be excreted. And once they're excreted, they'll go into the sewage system. You may not be able to eat all the apples, so some will end up being rotten. If you have one, it'd be a good idea to put these in your compost bin, where it's recycled. If not, it'll go straight into the waste bin, and after that, it'll be taken to a landfill site. The sewage can cause a lot of water pollution, and in some countries there are open sewers where it's just released into the environment untreated. Landfill causes a major problem around the world, and it's caused by a variety of factors. Generally, it's going to result in soil pollution. Unless organic, those apples will be sprayed with pesticides and fertilisers, and those are going to contribute to land and water pollution. The transport of these apples to its location is going to release a great deal of air pollution into the atmosphere. What about the fate of the packaging? So once we've finished with the packaging, unfortunately it usually ends up in our dustbins and then eventually to a landfill site. Cellophane that it's usually wrapped in is not recyclable, unfortunately. To make that cellophane, it will involve some form of manufacturing process, which will include air pollution. And of course the landfill site will result in land pollution. So who'd have thought a packet of apples would contribute to such different levels of pollution, and so many? Looking at all the different types of pollution in a bit more detail now, starting with land pollution. It'd be useful here for you to take some notes. So starting with the first example, toxic chemicals can be classed as a form of land pollution when they get into our systems. Pesticides and herbicides are examples. Pesticides kill pests that eat crops, and herbicides kill weeds. The problem with these is that the toxic chemicals can kill organisms and enter our food chains. Another type of land pollution includes landfill sites. This is used for dumping household waste that can't actually be recycled. The problem is that huge holes have to be dug across a mass area, hence deforestation is likely. This is going to result in soil pollution and lots of habitats being lost, affecting wildlife. Not only that, but it's known to have adverse effects on humans as harmful chemicals can get into the soil and water. Landfills also release greenhouse gases, such as methane, and these contribute to global warming. A third type of land pollution includes fly tipping. Fly tipping is a process whereby people dump their waste anywhere, and usually onto land that doesn't have a licence to accept it. The big problem with this is that it affects local wildlife and their habitats. There may be some hazardous material there, and because it attracts rodents, there is a chance of disease transmission. Fly tipping is illegal. A final example of land pollution includes the storage of nuclear waste underground from a nuclear power plant. These barrels contain spent fuel from nuclear reactors and can take up to 10,000 years to decay, if not more. They're stored 500 metres underground, but the problem is if there is a leakage, it can be incredibly harmful. Air pollution. This is largely caused by the combustion or burning of fossil fuels. Whenever we burn fossil fuels, it causes the release of certain gases that, when mixed with water in the atmosphere, can fall as acid rain. Sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, to be specific. Acid rain damages forests and lakes. Normal rain has a pH of around 5.6. Acid rain pH is between 4.2 and 4.4, so significantly acidic. As a result, it can harm certain species. A second type of air pollution, still involving the combustion of fossil fuels, is known as smoke pollution. Smoke pollution causes tiny solid particles to be suspended in our atmosphere, known as particulates. The particulates can reflect the sun's light, causing global dimming and smog. It also causes respiratory problems if we breathe it in. The third type of air pollution that we're probably most familiar with is the production of greenhouse gases as a result of the combustion of fossil fuels, which releases a large amount of CO2. We know that the greenhouse effect contributes to global warming and climate change. Water pollution. There are two examples of water pollution. The first cause is sewage. So the more people there are, the more human waste there is. The problem here is that if there are open sewers where the human waste is carried above ground and it's not covered, leading straight into water systems, this can be very harmful to ecosystems, just because there's a large quantity of bacteria in there. A second example of water pollution includes the use of toxic chemicals running into our rivers and streams as a result of fertilisers used on farms. Fertilisers are important for farmers to enable crops to grow. However, if it runs off as a result of the rain washing it through, then it causes a process called eutrophication. This simply means a process where algae grows on top of the water, blocking off the light to the plants underneath. If that's the case, photosynthesis won't happen and oxygen is removed from the water. When the oxygen's removed, then fish and other organisms will be killed, setting off a whole cycle of decomposition within that water. Eutrophication. Eutrophication is a big word that you may not have heard of before this lesson. There's a bit more detail to it than the previous slide, so I'm going to attempt to use this short video clip to be able to explain it to you better. There's some key words on the side that will help you to understand some of the processes that take place. It's a complex process that might need you to repeat the video to understand it better. Please do so.
Eutrophication is a process that can happen in a water body, like a river or lake, when too many nutrients are added to the system. Eutrophication starts when fertilizers, which are rich in nutrients like nitrate and phosphate, are washed into the river or lake system. This leads to an increase in nutrient concentrations in the water. The nutrients are food for algae, and the algae grow and reproduce quickly, forming a thick green bloom in the water. This algal bloom will absorb sunlight shining on the water, so the sunlight can't reach the bottom. Plants who need this light to photosynthesize will die. The algae will also start to die when they eat up all of the nutrients and run out of food. Next, bacteria start to break down the dead plants and algae, and that releases more nutrients back into the water, continuing the algal bloom cycle. The bacteria, with a continuing supply of food, reproduce into much larger numbers, consuming oxygen as they grow and respire. There's not much oxygen in the water to begin with, so when the bacteria consume it quickly, it might run out completely. Water without oxygen is called anoxic. If the water turns anoxic, all non-bacterial life in the water, including fish and other animals, will die. So, eutrophication happens when nutrients are added to water, which causes an algal bloom, cutting off sunlight and feeding bacteria. The bacteria use up oxygen in the water, which becomes anoxic, causing everything living in the water to die. Eutrophication is one reason why we need to be careful with fertilizers when we're growing crops.
So here we have a pollution summary table showing the causes and problems for each of the 3 different types of pollution that we've just discussed. Copy and complete the table using examples you've just learned about. The first example's been done for you. You can use any notes that you've made. Feel free to pause the video before moving on to the final few slides. Exam practice time. Starting off with a picture of a map, you can see up at the top you've got a forest, a bit further down you've got a lake and a farm, and then right at the bottom you've got a city. There is some water flow, presumably from the lake, and it seems to flow through the farm and through the city. The scale bar here shows the length of 5 kilometres demonstrated by the line. So here's the complete question. Every year the farmer puts fertiliser containing mineral ions on some of his fields. When there's a lot of rain, some of the fertiliser is washed into the river. When fertiliser goes into the river, the concentration of oxygen dissolved in the water decreases. Explain why the concentration of oxygen decreases, and that's worth 5 marks. Thinking about bugging your answer, can you imagine what you're going to box and underline? Here's the second part of the question. There is a city 4 kilometres downstream from the farm. Apart from fertiliser, give one other form of pollution that might go into the river as it flows through the city. And this is worth 1 mark. So, because this whole question is worth 6 marks in total, it's going to need 6 minutes of your time. So I'm just going to ask you to pause the video here for 6 minutes and then on to the next slide for the answers. Off you go. As you can see, I've already bugged my question. I've boxed the command word explain and I've underlined some key things that will help me hopefully focus in on the key points, such as fertiliser, oxygen and decreases. You might have underlined other words, that's fine. So let's see how you did with your answers. So 5 marks available. One of those marks could be for mentioning any of these. Fertiliser, iron salts cause the growth of algae or plants. The second mark is for saying that the growth of plants or algae blocks light. The next mark is for saying that the low light causes the algae or plants to die. Another mark for saying microorganisms cause the decay of organic matter or of dead plants. Or if you've not put microorganisms, you can mention bacteria. You will not get any marks if you mention germs or viruses instead of bacteria. And for another possible mark, you need to mention the word respiration. That's the key thing that you need to mention. And in particular, it's aerobic, but if you've missed that, it doesn't matter. So the respiration by microbes uses up the oxygen. do not allow anaerobic, because that's not the way the microorganisms respire. The second part of the question was a 1 marker, and as you can see, I've boxed the command word give and underlined a few key points: other form of pollution and river. So let's see how you've done on this. Here's the answers. So for 1 mark, you needed to mention any of these terms: sewage, toxic chemicals, or any correctly named example of metals, bleach, disinfectant, detergent, etc. You were allowed to have the mark if you mentioned any of these names, but you couldn't have just said the word chemical or waste or human waste, domestic waste or industrial waste. So that's how you got your marks. So just revisiting our learning outcomes. For our challenge, being able to describe how the rise in the human population impacts our planet is something that we've just looked at, and hopefully you should be comfortable in doing that. For the Aspire, you probably have some idea of the ability to explain how pollution affects biodiversity. The next few slides look at this in a bit more detail. So what is biodiversity? Well, if we take this word and split it up into two, we can see that it's made up of the word bio and diversity. Bio you'll have heard of in words like biology or biological, and bio simply means to do with living organisms. Diversity means to do with differences or having lots of variety. So when we put the two words together, we can see the word biodiversity simply means to do with the variety of all the different species of organisms on Earth or within an ecosystem. And those different species can be species of plants, animals and microorganisms that all live together in an area. Biodiversity is fundamentally important in making sure that our planet thrives and survives. So why is biodiversity important? One reason is stability. To have a consistent number in population of all the species that live within an environment is really important, because the removal of one species can have a massive impact on another, but if the numbers are stable, then it will help the ecosystem to survive. It also reduces the dependence of one species on another for things like food or shelter. We as humans rely on high biodiversity to survive. But as we all know, pollution is reducing biodiversity. Not good news for our planet, nor for us. Let's look at two examples of ecosystems. This particular ecosystem clearly shows a thriving population of many different species with the right physical environment for each other, the right amount of water, the right amount of light, the acidity of the soil, the temperature in the environment results in a harmonious ecosystem where all the species survive and are stable. The rock that I'm pointing to may have more biodiversity than the whole of the picture on the right. This picture shows a highly polluted area of water, and it's very unlikely that there'll be many species able to survive there. So in short, pollution lowers biodiversity by killing plants and animals. So for the human species to survive, it's important to have a good level of biodiversity. There's lots of human actions, including waste production and deforestation, global warming. They're all reducing biodiversity. However, it's only recently that we've started taking measures to stop this from continuing. You should now be comfortable in describing how the rise in the human population impacts our planet, but also be able to explain how pollution affects biodiversity. You can now complete the Google form as a plenary to this lesson. Any notes you've made can be used to help, and you'll receive a mark immediately after you submit this form. If you wish to watch the video again to help you, then that's fine. Feeding forward, I'd like you to design a poster entitled Reduce, Recycle, Reuse to explain the importance of each of those to maintaining a high biodiversity. When you've finished, you can upload a picture onto the classroom for your teachers to see. Well done on completing this lesson. Thank you.